August 1943. A grey morning sky hangs over a quiet meadow in occupied France. Dew clings to the grass, and in the distance farmers freeze mid-stride as a thunderous roar echoes overhead. A P-47 Thunderbolt smoking, crippled limps through the clouds, one engine coughing, one wing scorched. The pilot, barely conscious, spots an open field and pulls the lever. The massive fighter groans as it touches down, wheels collapsing, propeller bending, soil erupting around it. The jug skids, tears through a fence, and stops against a small embankment. Within minutes, Wehrmacht patrols arrive. The American pilot is dragged away, dazed but alive. But what captures their attention isn't the man, it's the machine. Word spreads fast. Berlin orders immediate transport. The Allies' new super fighter, the one their own pilots are calling unshootable, has fallen right into their hands. The aircraft is sent north to a Luftwaffe test center outside Paris. Waiting there is Werner Schulz, a 38-year-old engineer with thin wire glasses and grease-blackened hands. His orders: determine what makes this new American fighter so indestructible. He doesn't yet know that this inspection will break him. Because, as he opens the cowling and stares into the metal heart of the Thunderbolt, Schulz will come to a realization so devastating it will shake his faith in everything Germany believes about the war. He's about to learn that the war was already lost, not in the skies, not in the trenches, but in the factories. The hangar is silent, except for the clink of tools and the slow hiss of cooling metal. Schulz circles the P-47 like a man inspecting a captured dragon. Its fuselage is thicker, heavier, more brutish than anything in German service. He removes the cowling bolts one by one, and beneath it, the truth gleams in aluminum and steel. The Pratt & Whitney R2800. 18 cylinders, double-row radial, over 2,000 horsepower. Each cylinder wrapped in precision-machined fins, tighter, cleaner, smoother than any he's seen. The German engineers lean closer. One mutters, "Monstrous." Schulz only nods. He sees immediately what this means: power and endurance on a scale Germany cannot match. Then he notices something stranger, a maze of pipes snaking behind the engine, leading aft along the fuselage. "What are those?" someone asks. Schulz frowns. "Turbo ducts." He traces them by hand until he reaches a large turbine unit mounted near the tail. He stares in disbelief. The Americans have placed the turbo-supercharger behind the cockpit, using long ducts to feed pressurized air back to the engine, an engineering gamble so complex that no German designer would have dared it. The Americans hadn't just built a powerful engine, they had rewritten how to make engines breathe. He looks back at the Thunderbolt's massive frame, realizing it's not clumsy, it's deliberate. The bulk hides a network of systems. Germany doesn't have the alloys, the precision, or the manpower to reproduce. Every pipe, every fitting, every weld screams of an industry running at full power of factories, turning out miracles as casually as screws. And in that dim hangar, Schulz feels the first chill of understanding. They aren't just fighting another air force, he thinks. They're fighting a civilization built for war. Days later, the P-47 sits stripped open inside the Rechlin evaluation hangar, a dissected beast surrounded by men with clipboards, magnifiers, and disbelief. The Luftwaffe's top technical officers crowd around the tail section, where Schulz's team has mounted the American turbo-supercharger on a test rig. They connect air hoses, temperature gauges, and a portable compressor. When the machine comes alive, the roar is unlike anything they've heard, a deep, metallic howl, smooth and unwavering. No rattles, no flutter, no vibration. Schulz studies the pressure readings. At high-altitude simulations, the turbo maintains full manifold pressure, 30,000 feet of steady power. One of the younger engineers whistles. "It doesn't choke?" Schulz shakes his head slowly. Not even close. The data is irrefutable. This system allows the P-47 to fight and climb where German piston engines suffocate. It's the secret to its brutal high-altitude dominance. But what shocks them even more isn't the idea, it's the execution. The turbine housing is forged from heat-resistant alloys Germany doesn't possess. The control system is automatic, a self-regulating wastegate that adjusts airflow with electric precision. In Germany, pilots must manually throttle boost. In the P-47, a dial and lever do it flawlessly. Schultz's assistant, Richter, scribbles notes. "If we could copy it," Schultz cuts him off. "We can't." He gestures at the alloys, the precision welds, the machined impellers. "This isn't about blueprints. It's about infrastructure. The Americans are producing this like kitchenware." A pause settles. Everyone understands what he means. The Luftwaffe's turbocharger programs had been abandoned years earlier. Germany's early designs, like the Herth and DVL prototypes, melted under heat stress or seized from metal fatigue. Without chromium, nickel, and vanadium in sufficient supply, they could never build turbos that lasted more than a few hours. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, America had entire factories dedicated to producing these complex units by the thousands. Schultz flips through the American maintenance manual found in the cockpit, crisp English lettering, diagrams, step-by-step replacement guides. "They can swap one of these in 20 minutes, he mutters. Richter looks stunned. "How?" "Because they don't repair, they replace." That sentence hangs in the air like a verdict. Schultz looks around the hangar at men in worn uniforms, at the scarcity of tools, at the smell of burning oil. He feels it again, that creeping dread. The P-47 isn't just a fighter. It's a message that the Americans have built an engine for a war they can afford to fight endlessly. And in that realization, Schultz sees the future. Every time a Thunderbolt climbs above 30,000 feet, it's not just altitude it gains, it's inevitability. The engineers move from the engine to the body. Schultz watches as they begin to peel away the Thunderbolt's skin, thick duraluminum plates, layered and riveted with almost obsessive precision. When the panels come loose, they reveal ribs and spars, built like bridge girders. He runs his hand across one section of armor behind the cockpit. It's nearly half an inch thick. Yet the aircraft, weighing over 8 tons, can still climb faster than a Focke-Wulf 190. "How is that possible?" one of the technicians mutters. Schultz smiles faintly. "Because they built the power first, then built around it." Inside the wings, the structure looks more like a locomotive frame than an airplane. The control linkages are over-engineered, every wire harness bound and color-coded. Even the landing gear hydraulics, thick as a man's wrist, are clean and robust, as if designed for decades, not months, of service. Then the metallurgists bring their findings. The aluminum alloy, far stronger than Germany's standard grades, contains magnesium and trace elements they can't identify with certainty. The weld seams show no impurities. The bolts and fittings are identical across the airframe, suggesting automated precision manufacturing. It's not just craftsmanship, it's mass production at surgical tolerance. Schultz recalls how, back in Augsburg, mechanics had to custom file parts for each aircraft. No two fits were the same. Here, he realizes, America has achieved something Germany can't: interchangeability. He tests a spare bolt from the wing on the Boyd engine mount. It fits perfectly. He tries another, from the tail. Perfect again. He laughs quietly, almost in disbelief. Every one of these could come from a different factory, and they'd still fit. That's when he understands the real secret of the P-47. It's not the metal or the power. It's the system, a network of machines building machines, of workers following the same precise blueprint in Ohio, Kansas, and New Jersey. Germany, under constant bombing, can barely keep one production line running. The Americans are running 50. When they test-fire the Thunderbolt's 8 Browning machine guns, the recoil barely shudders the airframe. The gun mounts are so rigid that even full bursts don't loosen rivets. Schultz jots in his report, "Airframe integrity exceeds all known German standards, equivalent material quality not attainable at current resource levels." He doesn't show anyone the next line he writes privately. "Even if we stole the plans, we couldn't build the bolts." That night, he drinks alone in his quarters. The sound of Allied bombers hums faintly in the distance, and as he stares at the P-47's silhouette under the hangar lights, he knows for the first time that Germany's engineers are fighting an enemy that outproduces, outbuilds, and outlasts them. And that realization burns more deeply than any defeat in the air. Weeks later, Schultz sits alone at a long wooden table in the intelligence office at Rechlin. Around him are stacks of captured documents, Allied production reports, aerial reconnaissance photos of factories, and technical manuals smuggled through neutral channels. He's been tasked with compiling a comparative analysis, how fast the Americans can build versus how fast Germany can destroy. He already knows the answer will be damning. He sharpens his pencil and begins calculating. The figures are staggering. Over 500 P-47 seconds per month, leaving Republic Aviation's plant in Farmingdale, New York. A second line in Evansville, adding hundreds more. Pratt & Whitney's R2800 engines over 125,000, planned before the end of the war. He double-checks the numbers. They're correct. The Americans are building in months what would take Germany years. He flips to another report, U.S. fuel production. 250 million gallons of aviation gasoline each month, with octane ratings Germany can only dream of. Schultz sits back, the pencil trembling in his fingers. He does the math. Even if every German factory ran at maximum output, even if no bomber ever struck again, they couldn't equal 1/5 of the Allied total. He writes in the margin, "This is not a war of skill or courage, it is a war of arithmetic." At noon, his superior, Oberst Kruger, enters. "Schultz," he says sharply, "we need your assessment for the High Command. They want to know what advantage the Americans hold." Schultz hesitates. "All of it, sir?" Kruger frowns. "Be specific." Schultz looks him in the eye. "They have the capacity to replace every aircraft we destroy 10 times over." Kruger's jaw tightens. "You sound like a defeatist. It's mathematics, sir." But in 1943 Germany, mathematics was not a welcome truth. Later that evening, Schultz types the report with careful phrasing, avoiding words like impossible or hopeless. He writes instead, "Enemy industrial output exceeds projections by a factor of 8. Aircraft production unaffected by losses. Technological parity unobtainable under present conditions." He leaves the rest unsaid. When the report reaches Berlin, it's stamped Technische Bewertung, Eingeschränkt relevant technological evaluation, limited relevance. In the space of a single bureaucratic phrase, months of work are erased. That night, Schultz studies a photograph on his desk, a line of P-47 seconds being loaded onto rail cars, factory workers smiling, engines wrapped in protective canvas. He notices something he hadn't before, the background. Another assembly line, already producing the next batch. For every Thunderbolt they captured, America had already built 50 more. Schultz leans back, staring at the ceiling. The realization hits with a cold, mechanical certainty. Germany wasn't losing a war of bravery, it was losing a war of factories. And somewhere deep inside, the engineer feels something shift, not despair, but the clarity of a man who finally sees the full scope of the battlefield. It wasn't in France, it wasn't in Russia. It was in Detroit, in Buffalo, in every American town humming with power. By late autumn 1943, the leaves outside the Rechlin complex had turned red and brittle, carpeting the airfield in silence. Inside, Schultz's office glowed dimly under the light of a single desk lamp. He was preparing his most critical submission, yet a summary of everything he and his team had learned from the captured Thunderbolt. He titled it simply, Evaluation of U.S. Fighter Type P-47C, Strategic Implications. The language was measured, cautious, diplomatic, but beneath the polite phrasing lay an explosive truth. He wrote, "The P-47 represents the peak of industrial integration. Its design efficiency derives not from technical novelty, but from consistent, large-scale precision manufacturing. The combination of power plant performance, standardized assembly, and resource redundancy makes replication impossible under current Reich conditions." He paused before typing the last line. "This machine is evidence that industrial capacity, not ideology, now decides the outcome of air warfare." He knew that line alone could ruin him. Still, he sent the report through channels to the Luftwaffe Technical Command in Berlin. 2 weeks passed, no reply. When one finally came, it wasn't the response he expected. A sealed envelope, marked for internal use only. Inside, a single page, stamped in red, Untersuchung beendet, weiter Discussion unnötig. Investigation closed, further discussion unnecessary. He sat motionless, staring at the words. Later that evening, an officer from the propaganda department visited. He was courteous but cold. "You're a fine engineer, Schultz," he said, "but you must be careful how you interpret your findings. Some in Berlin see your conclusions as defeatist." "Defeatist?" Schultz echoed. "It's data. Data can be interpreted, but morale cannot." The man gave a thin smile and left. That night, Schultz found his original draft missing from the file room. Someone had removed it. In its place, he found a rewritten version stamped with the eagle seal of the ministry, the same report, but sanitized. The final paragraph now read, "Despite temporary production imbalances, German innovation and morale ensure ultimate victory." He stared at the forged words for a long time. Truth had been turned into comfort. Engineering had become propaganda. When he told his assistant Richter, the young man whispered, "Then why do we keep testing? Why do we keep reporting?" Schultz replied quietly, "Because someday someone will find the real version." But deep down, he knew the truth no longer mattered to those in power. He looked again at the Thunderbolt, still parked under the hangar lights, panels open, metal gleaming like a mirror. The American engine no longer looked like a machine. It looked like a monument not to power, but to system, precision, and honesty. And in that moment, Werner Schultz understood the one thing his leaders never would. You can lie to men, but you can't lie to metal. By the spring of 1944, the sound that once brought pride to German towns, the rumble of aircraft engines, now brought only fear. But this time, it wasn't the heavy drone of bombers that haunted the skies. It was the sharp, rolling thunder of P-47 squadrons cutting across the clouds in formation. Schultz stood one afternoon on the roof of the Rechlin testing hangar, eyes shaded, watching silver dots glint against the Sunday. Each dot was a Thunderbolt, thousands of horsepower, hundreds of miles from their bases, escorting bombers that no longer feared interception. He knew every bolt, every weld, every turbine line of those aircraft, and now he was watching them being used exactly as he had predicted, high above 30,000 feet, invulnerable, relentless. The Luftwaffe sent up interceptors. Fokker-Wulfs and Messerschmitts clawed for altitude, but their superchargers gasped thin air. The P-47 seconds dived, rolled, and tore through them like wolves among crows. Down below, anti-aircraft crews fired until barrels glowed red. The Americans didn't flinch. Their fighters dove to ground level, strafing trains, convoys, and fuel depots. For the first time, Schultz witnessed something horrifying. a fighter that was both a bomber and an executioner. By summer, the new P-47D variant arrived, a bubble canopy, paddle blade propeller, and engine upgrades that pushed it past 470 miles per hour. Schultz read the intelligence reports and felt a chill. "They're still improving it," he murmured. "They're not satisfied with dominance, they're perfecting it." The irony struck him hard. He had once reported that Germany could never replicate the P-47's engine due to its complexity. Now, the Americans were simplifying it, optimizing design for even faster production. He saw in those changes a terrifying truth. Industrial power wasn't static. It evolved. It learned. At the same time, German factories were burning. One by one, the plants that built their aircraft, engines, and munitions were erased by the very thunderbolts they had once studied. Each day brought new reports: synthetic fuel plant destroyed, ball bearing works flattened, rail line disrupted. Schultz could almost hear the echo of his own report from a year earlier, the one they had dismissed. He began to keep a secret notebook, hidden behind a loose floorboard. In it, he recorded each observation: the collapse of output, the shortage of alloys, the increase in failures. Next to the entry for May 1944, he wrote only 5 words: "The mathematics is closing in." One morning, a P-47 strafed a train line only kilometers from Rechlin. When Schultz went to inspect the wreckage, he found fragments of a bomb casing stamped "Made in Kansas City." He picked it up and stared at it for a long time, a perfect gleaming fragment, machined smooth even in destruction. He realized the war was no longer between nations. It was between machines that could be replaced and men who couldn't. And as the last Thunderbolt disappeared into the clouds, Schultz whispered the truth no one else dared say aloud: "They are winning with factories, not fighters." May 1945. Berlin has fallen. The Reich lies in ruins. And in a prison compound west of Kassel, former Luftwaffe engineer Werner Schultz sits on a wooden bench, staring at the mud outside his cell. All around him are fragments of the world he once believed in: uniforms stripped of insignia, officers who now avoid eye contact, scientists who once preached victory, now whispering about survival. He's alive, but hollow. For years, he'd fought a war of equations, and now the numbers have caught up. One morning, a pair of American officers arrive. They carry a stack of papers stamped with the eagle crest and the words Technische Bewertung, P-47. It's Schultz's own report, the one that was censored, rewritten, and buried. "Are you the author of this?" one of them asks. Schultz nods. The younger officer, a mechanic before the war, sits beside him. "You were right," he says quietly. "We found your copy in the archives, every figure checked out." Schultz lets out a slow breath. "Then you already knew how it would end?" The American smiles faintly. "No, we just had more steel, more fuel, more hands." They lead him outside to a nearby airfield. Parked along the runway are rows of Thunderbolt's engines gleaming, wings polished, symbols of a victory built not on ideology, but on machinery. One of the Americans invites him closer. "You want to see what came after?" He gestures to a hangar. Inside rests a B-29 superfortress, immense, gleaming, and unlike anything Schultz has ever seen. He walks around it slowly, tracing his hand along the engine cowlings for 3,350 seconds, each an evolution of the same concept he once studied in the Thunderbolt: bigger, cleaner, smarter. The American officer says, "That's what built our victory, not pilots, not generals, but the men who built this." Schultz stands silently, his reflection distorted in the polished aluminum. For years, he had believed that intellect and precision could overcome any deficit, that German ingenuity was unmatched. But here, in the shadow of an aircraft the size of a house, he realizes the scale of the lie. It was never about brilliance, it was about capacity, the ability to turn brilliance into millions of identical parts. He looks down the line of Thunderbolts and whispers, almost to himself, "We never stood a chance." When the Americans escort him back to the compound, one asks gently, "If you'd known all this in 43, would you have stopped working?" Schultz pauses. "No, I was an engineer. We fix what's broken, even when it's hopeless." That night, as he lies on his cot, he thinks not of the war, nor the ruins, but of a single machine, the P-47 he first touched in that dim French hangar 2 years earlier. To him, it no longer represents an enemy. It represents truth, the truth that numbers win wars. That precision, when multiplied by thousands, becomes destiny, and that for all his loyalty, skill, and sacrifice, his country's defeat was cast in metal long before the first bomb ever fell. History remembers the P-47 Thunderbolt as a flying fortress of its own, heavy, brutal, indestructible. But for men like Werner Schultz, it became something far deeper, a revelation carved in steel and logic. When he first laid hands on that captured fighter, he thought he was studying a machine. In truth, he was studying a civilization. Every weld in its frame told a story of vast assembly lines that never slept, of rail cars shuttling engines across a continent untouched by war, of mechanics trained not by ideology, but by manuals and precision. He realized that the P-47 wasn't just an aircraft, it was America, made mechanical. While Germany's factories hid underground, starving for alloys, the United States was building new cities of production, Buffalo, Chicago, Los Angeles, each one humming with electricity, each one capable of replacing in a week what Germany lost in a month. The Reich had built for perfection. The Allies built for quantity of perfection. That difference, invisible to soldiers on the front lines, became the deciding weapon of the war. When the P-47 screamed across the skies over France, it carried not just guns or bombs, but the weight of 16 million workers, thousands of factories, and a nation that had mastered the art of organized creation. Schultz would live quietly after the war, working on agricultural machinery in West Germany. He never spoke publicly about his time at Rechlin, but in one of his notebooks recovered after his death, he had written a single line beneath the faded blueprint of a radial engine. "Power is not in the engine. Power is in the hands that can build it again." And that was the lesson of the Thunderbolt, a truth Germany never grasped until it was too late. Wars are remembered for courage, tactics, and heroism. But they are decided by factories, by those who can transform blueprints into reality faster than their enemies can dream. When that captured P-47 landed in France in 1943, it brought more than wreckage. It brought a mirror showing Germany not just what the Allies had built, but what the Reich could never become. And as Schultz once whispered to a fellow engineer beneath the echoing roof of that hangar, "This machine doesn't lie. It's not arrogance that will defeat us, it's mathematics." Because in the end, horsepower was only the symptom. The true weapon was production. And in that war, the war of factories, Germany never stood a chance.